The room is too quiet for a king to fall. A microphone like a black, staring eye sits on a felted table. Cigarette smoke hangs in a stale ribbon. Somewhere beyond the walls, winter rain needles Windsor stone. You stand close enough to hear the breath before the words, dry, careful, final. The voice admits a fracture inside the crown. He cannot carry the burden without the woman he loves. A nation holds its stomach. Ink dries on vellum. Red wax cools around a seal. A pen lies at rest like a spent blade. Static crackles. Then silence. An absence as heavy as mourning cloth. You can almost taste the metallic air of the studio. The felt. The dust. The faint sour of old paper. In that hush, a monarchy changes shape not with a battle, but with a broadcast. You are not a tourist in time. You are a witness, and what you're about to remember may never leave you again. If this kind of history unsettles you in the right way, quiet, factual, and unblinking, subscribe. Like the video if the evidence matters more than rumor. Share it with someone who thinks monarchy is only ceremony. No hype, no raised voice, only records, photographs, and the cool air of the archive. If that's value to you, stay. We're going to follow the documents, and you can stand beside them. New episodes arrive weekly. Tell me which record you want opened next. You are posted in corridors most people never see. In January 1936, your shoes click past guards who look forward, not down, as the court moves through heavy curtains and practiced bows. The old king, George V, is dead. News bulletins say it in the measured syllables of the British Broadcasting Corporation. And the empire, vast, stitched across oceans, names his eldest son Edward as sovereign. The title arrives with trumpets and with gravity that no one can hear. Only feel in the arrangements. New portraits commissioned. Initials changed on stationery. The calendar of ceremonies rewritten in ink. The new king is already known as Prince of Wales. He toured mines and factories after the Great War, cheered by crowds who saw in him modern ease, open-necked shirts, a forward lean, an athlete's compact frame. Photographers liked him, so did the newsreels. But the camera never shows what a constitution must carry. The crown is not a personality, it is a structure of vows, religious, legal, imperial, and those vows tie the monarch to the Church of England, to Parliament, and to a world of dominions whose parliaments have their own voices and their own electorates. The title, King, is a thread that runs through all of it. Pull it carelessly and the fabric shifts. You are not a courtier of consequence. You lift files, stamp dates, watch messengers pass. The name you keep seeing in foreign newspapers, printed freely abroad, but not in the British press, is Wallis Warfield Simpson. Born in Maryland, twice married, now the companion of a king who has been seen escorting her into restaurants and houses where tact begins to fray. Divorce is a live wire in 1936. And the Supreme Governor of the Church of England cannot easily hold both sacrament and scandal. Prime Minister Stanley Baldwin attends upon the sovereign. The language is respectful, but the outline is severe. The crown is not a private estate, it is a public trust. Through spring and summer, you notice how the problem keeps not solving itself. Photographs bloom, columns multiply, editors hold their pens in London, elsewhere they do not. Behind doors you cannot open. The question arrives in narrowed forms. Could there be a morganatic marriage? The king wed but the wife no queen? Could there be a private arrangement? Each answer runs into hard walls, law, church, dominion governments whose consent is required, and a public that will be asked to accept a new kind of monarchy. By autumn, men with red boxes move faster. The Constitution makes no threats. It merely presents alternatives, and each of them costs. Honor the oath and give up the woman. Keep the woman and give up the oath. You stand in a corridor one evening and hear the echo of two words, if necessary. They are spoken in low voices but they carry, if necessary, Abdication. Not a plot, not a dare, only a lever the king himself can pull. The strangeness is how quiet the palace remains while the ground changes under it. This will be your station, near the edges of rooms, at microphones, beside papers that cool like metal when signatures dry. The story is frightening not because any blood runs, none need do so, but because a single private choice unstitches public fabric measured over centuries. You will see how that fabric tears, and how the loose threads travel into war, into diplomacy, into exile. You will smell cold stone, hear the drag of rain against doors, and taste the metallic air of a broadcast room where a crown is set down and history inhales. The year of the abdication, 1936. You begin with a bell, because that is how kings depart. On the 20th of January 1936, the death of George V moves through government offices in single, practiced sentences, and you watch portraits shift on the walls as officials take down one frame and lift another. Edward, Prince of Wales, is proclaimed king. The ink on proclamations is still wet when rumors spool through London parlors that this sovereign prefers plain speech and modern ease. You have seen that ease. The motorcars, the open collars, the camera's affection for a man who seems to lean toward the age rather than away from it. Wallis Warfield Simpson is not a rumor. Her name runs in American society columns and in European papers that carry photographs London will not print. She is twice married and, in 1936, pursuing a second divorce. The king is seen with her, dinners, weekends, a Mediterranean cruise where shutters chatter like cicadas. In England the press stays silent, not from ignorance but by restraint and law. Editors know the tension between deference and the public's right to know. Abroad, there is no such silence. You learn to read the British newspapers for what they leave out. Prime Minister Stanley Baldwin meets the king. You are not close enough to hear sentences, only to observe their consequences. Papers move, writers hurry, telephones ring longer. The Constitution has a simple shape that grows austere under pressure. The sovereign is also supreme governor of the Church of England. Marriage touches theology as well as law. When the idea of a morganatic marriage is raised, Edward to wed his wife not to be queen, it meets no secure footing in British practice and finds no support among Dominion governments whose consent would be essential. The words are gentle, the meaning is not. Summer ripens into autumn, and you measure change by how fast cars arrive at back entrances. There is nothing theatrical in the corridors, only pens, files, lamps, and the cough of a civil servant who has worked past supper. Yet the crisis thickens. You keep a list in your head of what is certain. A king determined. A prime minister immovable. A family that understands how ceremony masks strain. The royal family is not a tableau, it is a web of obligations. And every thread touches the crown. You begin to notice how often the phrase, "in the national interest," is spoken. And how carefully. In November, restraint collapses. The British press can no longer pretend that the most photographed man in Europe is alone. Parliament cannot move on major issues while the stature and intentions of the sovereign remain undefined. Baldwin tells the king plainly that the government cannot present a bill allowing a morganatic union. He cannot recommend it to the nation or to the dominions. Three alternatives harden. Give up the relationship, marry and force the government's resignation, or abdicate. Each choice carries not only domestic shock but imperial consequence. You feel the geography of the question stretch across maps. You are present in the sense that everyone in London is present. The city hums at a low, constant pitch, a machine waiting for instruction. Wireless sets glow on sideboards. The volume knobs shine with fingerprints. Men at clubs speak more quietly. Women in queues buy newspapers twice in one morning. In offices like yours, copyboys look up each time a messenger breaks into a slow trot. Words like crisis are avoided, they have too much heat. Instead, there are cooler phrases. the position, the matter, the problem. The air tastes of dust and carefulness. On the 10th of December, at Fort Belvedere in Windsor Great Park, the instrument of abdication is signed by Edward and witnessed by his 3 brothers. You are not inside the room. Yet the description spreads with speed, domestic quiet, a steady hand, the sheet that ends a reign of 11 months. The next night there is a voice. The king speaks by radio to say he has found it impossible to carry the heavy burden of responsibility without the help and support of the woman he loves. You stand close enough to the speaker to hear breath before words. The click before the current catches. After the broadcast, there is a pause that cannot be measured in seconds. Streets are not jubilant, neither are they riotous. People go home slowly, as if weight has changed the angle of their walking. The next morning, the new reign begins under Edward's brother, now George VI. Proclamations are read, coins and stamps will change in time, the notepaper on your desk changes at once. An office does not cry, it relabels. Yet you know the shock is not administrative. It is in the reversal of a tale that modern Britain had told itself, that romance and duty could be folded together without tearing. You watch the departure. The man who was king leaves Britain under weather that fits the mood. Rain that does not rage. Only persists. There is no coronation music. Only ship horns and the soft slam of doors. He will cross the channel. Then travel on. And next year marry on the 3rd of June 1937 at the Château de Candé in France. Those details you will file when they arrive. For now the file reads, Abdication. And the tabs behind it multiply. Titles. Allowances. Residence. Precedence. Security. Even departure requires forms. What did you witness? You saw a constitutional monarchy absorb stress exactly as designed. The government advised. The sovereign decided. Parliament prepared to enact what must follow. You also saw how the human heart, placed under lights and laws and the chill breath of microphones, can reroute the history of nations without a single regiment moving. The fear you carry now is of uncertainty, not violence. Europe's weather is changing. In Germany, crowds stiffen like formations. Flags seem to grow out of stone. Peace is spoken of, but it sounds increasingly like an echo. The year ends without a neat moral. In files and diaries, clerks and ministers record only what can be proved. Meetings, drafts, signatures, broadcasts. You add to that record the minor details that give the story its texture. The metallic taste of studio air. The rain that narrowed the city's colors to slate. The fact that even the most dramatic constitutional act has to be typed in duplicate. If the nation wanted a romance, it received instead a demonstration that modern power is managed by forms as much as by feelings. And that forms do not bend easily. The rest will follow. A ducal title. A wedding without a royal family present. A journey through Europe that will trail photographs like footprints. A wartime posting far from London. And a final house across the channel where time will continue its work. But that is another file. For the record of 1936, you write one last line and initial it so no one doubts who observed it. The crown did not fall, it was set down. The sound it made was not a crash, but a click. The latch of a door closing softly behind history. You lock the drawer and check the corridor. Lamps dim toward darkness. Outside, buses grind along streets. Somewhere a wireless crackles and is turned down. Not off, you think, not sentimentally. As a clerk who counts things, that the measurements of the day are fixed. Dates. Names. Pages. The length of a speech. The thickness of a signature. What cannot be counted is quiet that followed. And how, for a minute, a kingdom held its breath and did not know its future. Marriage, Germany, and the shadow of war, 1937 to 1939. You begin in France, where spring carries a false brightness. On the 3rd of June 1937, in the Loire Valley, The man who had been Edward VIII marries Wallis Warfield Simpson at the Château de Candé. You are not seated among the guests. There are no members of the British royal family present. No courtiers in uniform. No mother or brothers to soften the edges. The ceremony is civil, private in size but global in scrutiny. The bride wears pale blue. Her gown pressed into folds that seem to resist wrinkles as if fabric itself knew how closely photographs would study it. The groom wears a simple mourning coat. You hear vows in clear voices that do not tremble. Yet the silence around them is what history remembers. The absence of the family. The absence of sanction. The absence of a crown. The new Duke of Windsor. A title granted the day after his abdication. Signs papers that mark not only a marriage but a shift in precedence. His wife will not be styled Her Royal Highness. A detail as cold as it is deliberate. You see the bitterness behind lines of correspondence. The coolness in palace memoranda that note, in precise terms, how introductions must be phrased, how invitations must be declined. In France, the couple receives press attention and curious onlookers. But no official embrace. The monarchy in London folds inward, sealing its margins tight, while abroad the Windsors become a spectacle without a court. Summer turns into travel. You stand among those who watch their passage across Europe, where the shadows of flags and uniforms are lengthening. In October 1937, the Windsors visit Germany. Photographs show their arrival. Smiles. Handshakes. Motorcades through streets where swastika banners droop in autumn air. You cannot escape the detail most often repeated. The Duke and Duchess meeting Adolf Hitler at Berghof in Bavaria. The camera freezes the handshake. The angle of posture. The faint grin. Diaries note that the meeting lasted about 50 minutes. No transcript was published, only recollections. But the visit itself has been studied ever since. You sense the unease even then. Britain's Foreign Office raises eyebrows. Newspapers hint at impropriety, and whispers accumulate in diplomatic files that will not be opened for decades. You smell the paper of those files, stale, brittle, typed in carbon duplicate. They carry comments about the Duke's friendliness, his possible political leanings, his susceptibility to flattery. Some of it may be rumor, some speculation. But the fact remains. The Windsors chose to be photographed in the company of a regime whose symbols already carried menace. The images, once developed, could not be undeveloped. They linger, haunting every later assessment of the man who left his throne. Back in France, the Windsors settle into a rhythm of semi-exile. They move between rented villas, later establishing themselves more firmly in Paris. The Duchess surrounds herself with society, jewels, and couture. The Duke clings to routines, golf, correspondence, visits. You notice how often the letters cross the channel, how polite yet strained they become. There is always an edge of resentment, allowances negotiated, protocol contested, titles debated. Each envelope you touch feels heavier than its weight. Because each is a reminder that the abdication did not end with a signature, it continues in disputes about recognition, precedence, and money. Europe darkens. In 1938, Hitler absorbs Austria, then carves at Czechoslovakia. You listen to radio's sputter speeches that thunder with foreign consonants. Crowds roar in languages you may not know, but their pitch is unmistakable. Fervor, submission, aggression. In Britain, Neville Chamberlain's umbrella becomes a symbol of negotiation, but also of denial. You are aware that while Europe prepares for war, the Windsors remain figures of controversy. Some admire their glamour, others distrust their discretion. Security services file reports. Questions about loyalty circle like moths around lamps. By 1939, tension snaps into open conflict. Germany invades Poland on the 1st of September, and Britain declares war 2 days later. You are still in Paris, where the Windsors spend their summer. The sound of mobilization is everywhere. Boots on cobblestones. The rumble of trucks. Sirens that test and then sound for real. The Duke of Windsor is recalled to duty of a kind, an appointment as liaison with the French military mission. He wears uniform again, his figure still trim, but his authority diminished. Soldiers salute, but the gesture feels perfunctory. His role is defined, but narrow. The Duchess is restless, moving through salons, watching as Paris braces for war. You notice how people look at them, fascination mixed with suspicion. To some, they are tragic exiles; to others, they are reminders of a monarchy nearly shaken loose by private desire. To the British establishment, they are risks to be managed. The months between 1937 and 1939 leave no corpses to describe, no funerals to narrate, but they carry their own kind of morbidity. You sense it in the chill of documents that mention security assessments, in the gossip that turns into memorandum, in the photographs that will never fade. A king who left his throne, standing in smiling conversation with a dictator whose hand would soon be soaked in war. The unease is its own kind of rot, slower, quieter, but irreversible. You close the decade with a simple image. In Paris, a dinner table gleams with polished silver. Yet the city outside hums with blackout preparations. A chandelier glitters overhead, but you hear the muffled cough of anti-aircraft guns being tested in the distance. The Windsors laugh politely with guests, but you know what is coming. Their exile, once tinged with scandal and glamour, is about to be overrun by war. You are left with the impression of fragility, a couple who sought freedom, now caught in currents far larger than themselves, their choices written into files that historians will never stop opening. Wartime exile in the Bahamas, 1940 to 1945. You begin with the fall of France. June 1940. German troops enter Paris, and the city you once walked with café chatter now trembles with boots. You stand near the edge of the exodus, columns of refugees, carts laden with mattresses, bicycles creaking underweight they were never built to bear. Among this movement of millions, the Windsors must flee. The Duke had been serving as a military liaison, but his presence now becomes a liability. The Gestapo compiles dossiers that call him sympathetic to Germany, a figure who might be useful in reshaping Britain itself. Intelligence files note this, typed with grim precision. You read the carbon copies. Operation Willy, a Nazi scheme to abduct or entice the former king into collaboration. Should he remain within reach? The Duke and Duchess escape through Spain into Portugal. You smell the sweat of train compartments, the sour wine poured too quickly at border stations, the fatigue of officials stamping papers for travelers who once lived in palaces. Their lodging in Lisbon becomes a stage of rumors. Foreign journalists circle. Diplomats exchange anxious notes. What if the Germans succeed in luring the Duke? What if his resentment toward the establishment in London, his bitterness about allowances and titles, makes him pliable? The British government cannot risk it. Winston Churchill, new Prime Minister since May, sends clear orders. The Windsors must be removed, not negotiated with, not permitted to linger in Europe's danger zones. Exile is now a matter of national security. The posting is the Bahamas. It is not an invitation, it is a directive. The Duke is appointed governor in 1940. You watch him board a ship under discreet escort, the Atlantic rolling dark beneath. The Duchess follows, her luggage heavy with gowns and jewelry, items almost mocking the ration books that govern the lives of millions. The sea air is thick with salt, but you sense the iron taste of containment. This is not a voyage of honor. It is a controlled relocation. Arrival in Nassau brings a change in light. You step onto an island where the sun burns white against colonial buildings painted in pastel, their shutters creaking in the breeze. The air smells of salt and cane, but also of neglect. The Bahamas are poor, their economy faltering, their people subject to poverty that the Windsors seem only half aware of. The Duke takes office, his uniform pressed, His posture correct, yet the weight of the governorship feels ceremonial. He attends functions, reviews documents, and hosts receptions, but his presence radiates frustration. He had once been heir to an empire. Now he governs an archipelago too small to contain his ambition, yet too significant to let him roam elsewhere. Unrest arrives in Nassau in June 1942. A riot breaks out among laborers demanding better wages. Windows shatter, smoke rises, troops deploy. You stand in the glare of torches and hear the blunt crack of batons. The Duke tours the damage afterward, his remarks blaming communist agitators, rather than recognizing the grinding poverty that colonial policy has long ignored. His words are recorded in dispatches, his disdain is noted. You realize how estranged he has become not only from Britain but from the lives of ordinary subjects. The Bahamas reveal the distance between ruler and ruled in ways no abdication speech could. Throughout the war, rumors persist. Files in London grow thicker. Marked secret. Reports from American and British intelligence suggest the Windsors may still harbor pro-German sympathies. Letters are intercepted. Conversations observed. The Duke complains of being sidelined, of being denied the respect he believes due. The Duchess writes bitterly about her treatment by the royal family. These are human frustrations, but in wartime they echo like potential betrayals. Churchill keeps them in Nassau partly to contain them, partly to prevent them becoming symbols for enemies. Their gilded cage is tropical, but it is still a cage. You notice the smaller details of their exile. The governor's mansion smells of mildew in the wet season. Silver polish cannot keep the damp from creeping into cutlery. Servants whisper in corridors about the Duchess's temper, about the endless arrivals of trunks from New York filled with perfumes and gowns. Outside, Bahamians labor in heat that makes their shirts cling and their breaths shallow. The contrast is severe, and you, standing between worlds, cannot ignore it, even as war consumes Europe. This island exile tells another story, of power reduced to ceremony, of scandal contained by geography. By 1944, the tide of war turns. Normandy landings succeed, Paris is liberated, and the Caribbean feels further away from history's center. Yet you read the memoranda that still pass between London and Washington. They speak not of battles but of suspicion, whether the Duke's past friendliness toward Nazi officials was personal vanity or dangerous sympathy. Those documents are precise, unemotional, and you can feel the anxiety beneath them. No court trial will ever come. No charges will be laid. But the shadow remains. In 1945, war ends. Europe is ash and smoke. Its cities gutted. Its camps revealed in horror. The Windsors leave the Bahamas. Their governorship complete. Their role in the empire concluded. They sail not home to Britain but back to France. Their exile restored in peacetime form. You picture their departure. The pier. The trunks. The humid air. The polite farewell from colonial officials who will not miss them. The Duke tips his hat. The Duchess smiles, her jewels catching tropical sun. Behind them lies 5 years of containment. Years when the crown itself had feared what the abdicated king might yet become. You close the wartime file with unease. It is not a story of open treason, but of proximity, of possibilities that terrified governments. You hold the paper long enough to smell the dust of its envelope, to hear the faint crack of its brittle fold. What you witnessed was not loyalty or rebellion, but something far more ambiguous. A man who once held the highest title in Britain, reduced to a governor on a distant island, watched constantly, suspected quietly, and never trusted again. Paris exile and the dimming of relevance, 1946 to 1960. You begin on the Quai d'Orsay in Paris, where returning exiles step from motorcars into the polished air of a city trying to wash itself of war. It is 1946, and Europe is divided by ration cards and rubble. Yet for the Windsors, France becomes both stage and refuge. They settle first in a succession of hotels and rented villas before, in 1952, securing a permanent residence. 4. Route du Champ d'Entraînement, a house in the Bois de Boulogne provided by the city of Paris. You walk through its gates and sense at once how exile has hardened into permanence. The house is comfortable, even grand, with stone facades and rooms large enough for receptions. But the smell is not of monarchy. It is of fresh paint trying to mask damp, of polished parquet hiding scratches. The Duchess fills it with furniture and objets d'art, many acquired on credit or as gifts from wealthy acquaintances. Guests enter salons where the light falls through gauzy curtains onto gilt mirrors. Cocktail glasses clink. Laughter arcs across rooms. For the Windsors, Paris is society, fashion, attention, yet never respect. You notice how invitations are worded carefully, how official British representatives often decline. The couple lives in glitter, but the crown keeps its distance. Through the late 1940s and into the 1950s, the Duke maintains contact with London through correspondence. Always formal, always edged with grievance. He complains of allowances, of precedence at public events, of the refusal to grant his wife the style, Her Royal Highness. Letters to his brother, now George VI, are stiff and polite, but the wounds remain visible between lines. The files in the Foreign Office reflect this. Reports on the Windsors' financial dealings, their movements, their connections with American businessmen and French society figures. You hold the thin paper and see how bureaucracy continues the work of surveillance long after war has ended. High society in Paris embraces the Duchess as a figure of style. She becomes a fixture at fashion shows. Her wardrobe designed by the great houses, Chiarelli, Dior, Givenchy. Magazines photograph her sharp cheekbones, her carefully arranged hair. She is immaculate, a surface polished to mirror brightness. The Duke walks beside her, tailored but weary, often clutching a cigarette. At dinners, he tells stories of the past with a smile that seems both charming and defensive. You smell the perfume, the tobacco, the candle wax dripping on silver. Yet behind the glamour lies a deeper silence. No role, no office, no duty beyond entertaining. Health becomes an undercurrent. The Duke, once trim and athletic, begins to show the wear of years and of habits. Cigarettes leave their trace in his cough, whiskey in the red of his cheeks. Doctors note arterial problems, hypertension. He remains active in appearance, golfing, traveling, but you see how his step loses rhythm. Medical notes from the late 1950s confirm hardening of the arteries, the slow narrowing of vitality. You feel it in the way he rests his hand on chair arms more often, in the longer pauses between his jokes at dinner. The Duchess insists on appearances, yet the body tells its own story. The monarchy moves on without him. George VI dies in 1952, and his daughter ascends as Elizabeth II. You are present, if only by radio, when Britain crowns a young queen in Westminster Abbey. Trumpets echo, choirs sing, cameras broadcast to millions. In Paris, the Windsors watch on television. The contrast is unbearable. An abdicated king in a drawing room, cigarette smoke curling toward chandeliers. Watching the throne, he gave away pass into another generation. Guests later recall that he kept his composure. But you, as witness, feel the silence in that room more than any anecdote. The coronation is light in London, but shadow in Paris. Financial troubles continue, despite allowances from the civil list and private investments. The Windsors live beyond their means. Bills accumulate. Jewels are bought and sold, sometimes quietly. Sotheby's later catalogs will testify to the scale of their possessions. You leaf through account statements that smell faintly of ink and desperation. Their life is a glittering show, but beneath it lies constant calculation. How to maintain status without official recognition. How to fund luxury without office. Friends assist. Benefactors contribute. But each gift underscores dependence. For a man who once embodied sovereignty, dependence tastes bitter. By the late 1950s, relevance fades. The Duke publishes memoirs, A King's Story in 1951, framed as personal reflection. But widely seen as defensive, the text sells, yet it irritates officials who consider it indiscreet. Critics accuse him of self-justification. You read passages that attempt dignity, but the undertone is plain, bitterness wrapped in charm. The Duchess, too, publishes recollections later, both texts part of a strategy to control narrative, to fix their version of events. But memory is slippery. You notice how readers interpret, how journalists dissect, how historians return to the same questions. Was abdication sacrifice or selfishness? Was exile tragedy or consequence? The Paris years are scented with roses in gardens, but also with cigarette ash ground into carpets. They are marked by jewels glittering under chandeliers, but also by unpaid invoices folded into drawers. You sense the pattern. Surfaces polished, interiors unsettled. The Windsors host parties with celebrities, Noel Coward, Marlene Dietrich, Aristotle Onassis, but their names drift toward gossip columns rather than state records. The Duke, once at the center of empire, is now an ornament at the edge of high society. By 1960, the decline is visible. His hair grays, his posture bends slightly. Medical reports warn of circulatory disease, of the risks of continued smoking and drinking. He ignores them. The Duchess continues to dress flawlessly, her control of image unyielding. But her tone grows sharper with age, more brittle with journalists, more insistent on protocol no longer granted. Their house becomes both a salon and a mausoleum of relevance, filled with guests, yet empty of purpose. You close this decade's file with an image from Christmas 1960. The Windsors in their Paris drawing room. A tree glittering with ornaments. A table laid with crystal. The Duke raises a glass, smiles, and makes a toast no one records. Outside, Paris winter presses its cold breath against the windows. You can feel in that room the fading of power, the persistence of appearances, and the slow approach of mortality. For all the light, the shadows are lengthening. The exile, once scandalous, has become routine, and in routine, decay waits quietly. Illness, decline, and the last years, 1961 to 1971. You begin in Paris, where the walls of the Bois de Boulogne residence now seem to echo with fewer voices. The dinners continue, but their frequency wanes. By the early 1960s, the Duke of Windsor is a man in his late 60s, and his body carries the evidence of decades of cigarettes, alcohol, and stress. Doctors' reports, clipped, clinical, dated with careful precision, note arterial sclerosis, circulatory weakness, and hypertension. His complexion reddens easily. His breath shortens after small exertions. You walk past the drawing rooms and hear a cough rasping through the corridors, harsh against the polished silence of parquet floors. The Duchess keeps appearances immaculate. She dresses in couture, maintains her sharp cheekbones, and controls every photograph that leaves the house. But her control cannot mask decline. Guests who attend their soirees whisper later that the Duke seems smaller, less animated, his once bright charm dimming into rehearsed stories. You see the fatigue in his hands, trembling slightly as he raises a glass, slower as he signs a dedication. Beneath the perfume of Dior and the gleam of silver, there is an undertone of sickness, the sour metallic scent of medication bottles, the faint chemical tang of antiseptic that lingers in the Duke's private rooms. Public moments punctuate the decline. In 1967, the Windsors return briefly to Britain for the unveiling of a plaque to Queen Mary, the Duke's mother. The visit is tightly managed. You watch him step onto English soil with cameras trained on his every move. His hair is silver now, his back slightly bent, his voice quieter. There is no triumphal welcome, only a cautious courtesy. He smiles, shakes hands, and departs quickly. The monarchy maintains distance. The rift of abdication never heals. For you, the witness, the scene feels like a ghost walking through a house that no longer belongs to him. Illness deepens. By the late 1960s, medical bulletins confirm what was long suspected: cancer. The Duke is diagnosed with throat cancer in 1971, a consequence of lifelong smoking. You sit in a room heavy with tobacco ghosts, knowing that each cigarette decades earlier carried this moment within it. The doctors speak in low voices, their words clinical but final. Radiotherapy is attempted, but the disease advances. The Duke grows thinner, his face drawn, his eyes still sharp but set within hollows. Photographs from these years show him fragile, his collar too loose, his frame diminished. The sound of his cough fills the house like a clock marking the hours left. The Duchess insists on routine, even as her husband weakens. Breakfast is laid, clothes are pressed, jewels are polished. Guests still arrive, though fewer now, and you watch as they enter rooms hushed by the presence of illness. They speak politely, drink champagne, and leave quickly, glancing back at a man who was once king but is now fading before them. In those rooms you notice another smell: flowers brought daily, their sweetness thick, almost cloying, as if to drown out the odor of sickness and approaching death. May 1972 brings a final act. Queen Elizabeth II visits the Duke at his Paris home, her uncle. Her predecessor, the man whose decision had changed the course of her life. You stand at a discreet distance, observing history fold in on itself. The Queen enters in formality, the Duchess by her side. The Duke, frail, rises with difficulty, dressed carefully, his voice soft but steady. The meeting is brief, respectful, without sentiment. No cameras capture private words, but the presence itself is record enough. For the Duke, it is recognition of a kind. For the monarchy, it is closure. On the 28th of May 1972, the Duke of Windsor dies in his Paris home at the age of 77. You are in the room, if only as silent witness. When the last breath leaves him, the curtains are drawn, the air still. The Duchess holds his hand, her face set in steel control. The body lies quiet, the skin pale, the mouth slightly open. Death smells faintly of linen, of antiseptic, of extinguished smoke. Doctors confirm, papers are signed, the house settles into silence. Outside, Paris moves on with ordinary noise, indifferent to the passing of a man who once wore a crown. The body is returned to Britain for burial. You stand in St. George's Chapel at Windsor, where banners hang motionless in the still air. The coffin is draped, the ceremony precise. Members of the royal family attend, solemn, correct. The Duchess follows behind, her face hidden behind a black veil. The service is short, the interment final. Earth falls on the coffin with a dull thud, a sound swallowed quickly by prayer. For all the scandal, all the exile, he is laid among kings. The circle, in its cold way, closes. You leave with one final impression: the life of Edward VIII. Reduced in the end to silence, to a coffin lowered into English soil, to a name inscribed in stone. The house in Paris will remain, filled with jewels, gowns, and memories. But the man is gone. The monarchy moves forward. The scandal becomes history. And you, the witness, are left with the sound of dirt striking wood, the smell of lilies, and the knowledge that power fades. Flesh weakens, and crowns, once set aside, can never be reclaimed. Legacy, silence, and the weight of time. You begin not with a man but with a grave. St. George's Chapel at Windsor holds centuries of monarchs and consorts, stone effigies and carved banners. Among them lies Edward, once king, later duke, his coffin beneath a slab of pale stone marked simply with his name and years. You kneel near the flagstones and feel the cold radiating up through your knees. It is the same chapel where coronations are blessed, marriages are sanctified, and dynasties are remembered. Yet his presence here is uneasy, a reminder not of triumph but of rupture. The story of Edward VIII is written across archives, newspapers, and memoirs, but its shape is strange. He reigned for 326 days, less than a year, and yet his decision altered the monarchy more than many who reigned for decades. You trace the consequences. Elizabeth II's long rule came because he stepped down. Britain's image of monarchy hardened in response to his scandal. Constitutional law proved its strength by absorbing abdication without collapse. And behind all of it stands the figure of a man who chose private love over public duty. And a woman who became, in the eyes of the establishment, the fracture itself. You remember the rooms you passed through, the broadcast studio with its metallic air, the chateau wedding with its absent family, the German visit with its banners unfurled, the Bahamian governor's mansion with its mildew and unrest, the Paris salons heavy with perfume and smoke, and finally the quiet bedroom where coughs gave way to silence. Each room smelled of its own time, yet together they carried one scent: exile. He was never again at home, neither in Britain nor in the world he sought. Historians argue, was Edward naive, vain, manipulated by foreign regimes? Was Wallis ambitious, sacrificial, or victim? You, the witness, do not argue. You only observe the evidence: photographs, letters, broadcasts, medical notes. They tell of charm that curdled, of power reduced to ceremonial exile, of a body undone by cigarettes, of a crown set aside and never retrieved. The tragedy is not romantic but procedural. Documents stamped, signatures dried, titles reassigned. In those papers, you can almost hear the faint rustle of history swallowing a man whole. Walk again through Paris, past the Bois de Boulogne house now empty of its occupants. Windows shuttered, curtains drawn, rooms filled with dust rather than guests. A chandelier gathers cobwebs. Wardrobes once crowded with couture stand still. The silence here is thicker than any scandal, thicker than perfume. Time has its own smell: dry wood, old fabric, the faint must of disuse. No laughter remains, only echoes. Return once more to Windsor. The grave is plain. Tourists shuffle past, some pausing, some not. Few linger. Names carved in stone are read quickly before footsteps move on to better-known monarchs. Edward lies there, beside the Duchess, both reduced to a shared silence. Whatever fury they caused, whatever fascination they held, is pressed flat beneath marble and earth. And you, standing above them, understand the simplest truth. Crowns tarnish. Beauty fades. Voices fall silent. All that remains is the record, archival dust, stone inscriptions, and the uneasy feeling that history is not a story of romance, but of choices that echo long after breath is gone. The last image is of stone, pale under dim chapel light, letters carved shallowly, almost worn already. You close your eyes and feel how cold the air is, how final the quiet, because time is not merciful. It erases kings and scandals alike, and it reminds you that even the most glittering crown cannot shield flesh from decay, nor choices from consequence.